How can we experience a pain so intense that we feel like we can't go on when others before us have objectively gone through worse and managed to fight through it? By we, I'm referring to the fortunate population of people who have what we'd call first world problems.
My diamond earring's gone. And there's people that are dying.
Those of us fortunate enough to live in a place with relative economic stability who can meet their needs with relative ease by working a 40 or 50-hour work week. And when referring to pain, I mean emotional pain.
Emotional damage!
Physical pain is an objectively measurable fact and has very little bearing on this conversation. The film A Real Pain from Jesse Eisenberg starts an interesting dialogue about the exact phenomenon that I'm laying out. This question also hits home for me personally. I've suffered from serious mental illness for many years. So a film that follows two objectively privileged people as they struggle with their mental illness and face the reality of the horror that their grandmother went through as a Holocaust survivor comes into direct contact with that question. But does it provide a compelling answer? And does it tell a good story while getting to that answer? Let's get into my review, starting with what I like and didn't like about the movie, and find out. My first like is the character introduction. I really like a movie that gets right to it with character introductions and lets us know who the characters are really quickly. From the opening scene, we get a really good feel for Mark's character. He gives off this extremely anxious vibe as he leaves voicemail after voicemail for Benji, updating him about his trip to the airport. Similarly, once Mark arrives, we're introduced to Benji. And while Benji's vibe can't be easily summed up in a single sentence, we get a pretty good idea of what we're in for from this character.
I also got some good shit from when we land. Like, very, very good shit.
Wait, you're not, like, taking weed into Poland, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Benji?
They don't give a shit about that stuff, man.
I think they very much do give a shit about that stuff.
Yeah, really? They're gonna arrest 2 Jews in Poland for a little bit of weed. That's a good look for the Polish people.
And don't worry, my next several bullet points will be a deep dive into Benji's character. The movie sets up right away Benji's kind of overwhelming affection towards people and general carefree attitude. The first thing that Benji says is that he's been waiting at the airport for hours, just enjoying the company of strangers. All of this lays the groundwork for a really interesting character dynamic that is used throughout the film to add a little bit of levity to what would otherwise be an incredibly heavy movie. One of my favorite details about A Real Pain is Benji's ability to draw people in. He learns intimate details about people's personal lives very rapidly, and he does this by doing something very simple. He actually cares what people have to say. When Benji asks a question, he wants to know the answers, and the people who are talking to him understand that implicitly. Kieran Culkin does a really good job displaying this on screen, but it's also written into the character. Benji does not approach people with the "hi, how are you" script that most people use to get through their day-to-day small talk. He asks questions and he listens for answers. I really like this detail because it's something that I've tried and often failed to implement in my own life. I generally really hate small talk, but I would like to be more sociable and feel more approachable to people. So taking a genuine interest in their lives is something that I've tried. It turns out I just don't like people very much. But generally, I think this is something that would be really beneficial. I think it could do a lot of people a lot of good. In fact, if you took nothing away from this video other than the idea that you should stop having the same conversation with people about the weather and take a genuine interest in their lives, I would be very happy. And I would be even happier if you hit like and subscribe. Next up for the likes is the reveal of Benji's mental health issues. After Benji has some obvious outbursts to disturb some of the tour groups, but has also managed to sufficiently endear himself to most of them.
What a troubled young man.
He wants to be good. You can see the spark. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Forgive me if I don't see this magical spark.
He disappears for enough time for the group to start talking about him, and it's revealed in frustration by Mark that Benji had attempted suicide a few months prior. This monologue is really the only direct address of the theme. Mark talks about his own struggle with OCD and speculates as to whether anyone is really happy.
Look at what happened to our families. Look at where we came from. I mean, who isn't rot?
Well, you seem okay.
I'm not, though. I'm not. I just, take a pill for my fucking OCD, and I jog, and I meditate, and I go to work in the morning, and I, come home at the end of the day, and I, move forward, because I know that my pain is unexceptional, so I don't feel the need to, burden everybody with it,
Yeah.
But mostly he just expresses frustration with Benji for having done something so selfish as to attempt suicide. This is where the question of what right do the privileged have to emotional pain comes up.
How did the product of 1,000 fucking miracles overdose on a bottle of sleeping pills?
It seems like Mark's general idea is to continue on, if not for the sake of happiness, then for the sake of simply moving forward. I think this is why Mark was told that he specifically would benefit from traditional religious practice.
So you're like really religious, yeah?
Yes, you could say that. And you?
No. I mean, the whole thing always seemed like a little, I don't know, arbitrary and mechanical and archaic to me. I mean, no offense, obviously.
I think it would really benefit you.
You mean like benefit everybody, or like me specifically?
You specifically.
Previously, God gave people their reasoning for moving forward, and maybe more specifically, their belief in something greater, their belief in this heavenly beyond, gave them a reason for moving forward even through intense suffering. Obviously, with the triumph of scientific reasoning, we lost a lot of our belief in something greater, and don't worry, I'm not about to pitch Jesus to you. It's hard to argue that something is missing without this image of heaven moving us forward. I think this is partly what Nietzsche was referring to when he declared the death of God. I think people had lost their orienting structure, and we've failed to replace it yet scientifically. What people have used for a substitute now is the focus on being happy, and I'm not a traditionally religious person. I have no belief in the spaghetti monster in the sky, but what I do believe in is the power of narrative, of myth, of stories. And I think that if people gave up on looking to happiness for a reason to move forward, then they could find something better. They could substitute meaning with their reason of moving forward. I think if people did their best to be their best and to pursue something that was meaningful to them, something that they could choose to do that would be meaningful for them and for their families and for the world, then the world would get so much better so fast, and happiness would be a welcome side effect of that. I think that this strategy is how human beings come close to getting to heaven, by simply making the world better. I don't believe in a place that you can go after death, but I do believe that the world that we leave behind could be better if we acted properly. In fact, I believe it's possible if we collectively did this, that the world would be so much better it may as well be heaven. This is why I do this. I think that finding the meaning in stories is not only fun, but genuinely meaningful and could be of some serious impact to people if I did it well enough. And since I've started doing this, since I've started pursuing making real progress towards a goal that's meaningful to me, I have been happier. And I've been more able to cope with it when I'm not. After that little rant, you might be wondering, wasn't this guy talking about a movie or something? So my next like is when Mark slaps Benji. This is actually a nice moment that is both comical and meaningful in some way. Benji, for some godforsaken reason that I will discuss later, makes the decision at the end of the movie that he's going to stay in the airport rather than going to dinner with his long-lost beloved cousin. After Benji says this, Mark slaps him in reference to a story that Benji told where their grandmother slapped him because he was late to dinner, and it showed how much she cared about him and helped him get his life right. And Mark was trying to help Benji in this moment get his life together. Mark makes the comment that it was different when their grandmother did it because he was 18 and needed direction, but the only difference is now Benji is 30 and needed direction. And after the passing of their grandmother, Mark has to take up this role for Benji. Anyway, for all of my problems with the ending, and again, we'll get there, I think this is a nice moment, and it gets the last of my likes. For my dislikes, we're starting with the music. And I don't want to imply that I didn't like the choice of music in this movie. I actually really like the choice of music in this movie.
Hidden around the city. And the oldest surviving synagogue is on the second floor of an office building.
I really like classical piano generally, and I think that the classical piano kind of has a really nice backdrop for this movie. But what really bugs me and strikes me as strange with this movie is the decision to use the music as filler for long periods of no dialogue and photo montages. The music kind of took me out of the severity of some of these photo montages, and I think that it kind of offset the vibe of the film and didn't work, at least for me. I'm sure that some reviewer has some deep opinion about why the music in A Real Pain is symbolic of something and really good for that reason, but whatever that is, it went right over my head, and I far too often found myself distracted by the music in A Real Pain. Next is this very strange argument that takes place as to whether they should feel guilty about being Jews riding first class on a train in Poland.
I think you should move to another train car.
What do you mean?
You don't feel weird being in a first-class car?
No, we paid for it. It's not hurting anybody. No.
Dude, we are Jews on a train in Poland. Fucking think about it.
This is another call to the feeling of guilt for your comparative privilege to your ancestors, especially when you find yourself miserable in the face of that privilege. I think that my problem with this, more than the argument itself, is the execution of this scene. It seems that it was kind of placed to stir up drama for no real reason at this point in the film, and to kind of further emphasize just how strange Benji is compared to normal people. It was also pretty obviously a confused statement about Benji's feelings about rich people, which is further evidenced by this later scene where he is perfectly fine sitting in first class as long as they didn't pay for it themselves.
Hey, Benji?
Yeah.
We're in first class.
Yeah, but we fucking earned it.
Third and finally is Benji's resolution. At the end of the movie, Benji decides that he's gonna hang out at the airport for a while.
You know what? I think I'm probably just gonna kick it here for a little while.
At the airport.
Yeah, kind of like it here. You meet the craziest people, man.
Which leaves him in exactly the same place that he started in. Quite literally. Now, I'm not sure if this was supposed to be symbolic of him being more satisfied in life and ready for the next adventure, but what it felt like to me was that the whole point of the movie meant absolutely nothing, which is beyond infuriating to me. The whole point of a movie is to have a character move from point A to point B in a way in which the viewer can take the theme or the general idea of their actions and apply it to their own map of the world. This allows the viewer of the film or the reader of the story to make more informed decisions about their actions in life. We're modeling actions and figuring out how to act in the world, and we're using information told in stories to help us inform those decisions. But instead, Jesse Eisenberg seems to have just given up on his theme halfway through. It asked an interesting question, but it gave no compelling answer. It didn't even give a possible solution for where you might look to find an answer. It did nothing. Really, it just asked a question. It's like your annoying coworker at work who comes up to you with a problem that they have tried nothing to solve and then asks you to solve it for them. It's completely useless. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll address this more when I move on to score the theme. So let's break down A Real Pain and give it a score, starting with the plot. I think this movie struggles a little bit early on to get viewers engaged with it. It seems to me that it's trying to rely on humor to get you engaged, but I don't think it's funny enough to make that a reason to watch. I don't think anyone would recommend this movie because it was funny. I think that its biggest flaw is that it fails to set up any real stakes early in the movie. It saves the big reveal of Benji's suicide attempt for way later in the film, and that's the only stakes that any of the characters really have. There's no reason for us to be watching this journey early on, so you end up kind of not really knowing why you're watching the movie. However, it was well paced, and the central drama of the movie is interesting once it gets fleshed out. It gets a 4 out of 10. The writing in A Real Pain is actually one of the stronger points of this movie. It's really difficult, especially given how strange Benji's character is, to write this character who still feels natural, but being this odd.
I'm actually African born. Rwandan. And to answer the question, maybe you are thinking of asking, I'm a survivor of the genocide.
Oh, snap. Sorry, no, I just meant... No, that's like... I meant that in a good way. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Snap. It's like, oh, shit. Oh, wow, holy... You know, I'm just interested in people from other places. It's like I'm a fan. Basically. Keep going, dude.
It also uses a lot of levity to a situation that would be incredibly hard to watch otherwise. It gets an 8 out of 10. The cinematography in this movie is, well, it's interesting. I do like some of the sets, which are mostly just Poland, and I like some of the choices that they made. It relies pretty heavily on photo montages for the more interesting shots, and I understand a little bit of why they did this. They want to let some of the locations speak for themselves, and this is a creative and new way to tell a story. I don't hate it. I just don't know how dynamic it makes the story. And it also could be viewed as a subtle hint that the movie isn't going anywhere. So I think I'll give it a 6 out of 10. On to the characters. I already talked about my problems with Benji's character resolution, and the same thing really applies to Mark. There's no real character arcs in this movie at all, which, as I stated previously, is an entire point of the movie. If the characters' actions have no impact on their lives, why would their actions have any impact on my life? Why would I bother listening to your story if it's about nothing, if it has no point? That being said, I do like personally like the characters on a level that they seem like interesting and kind people. And I think that they're characters that an audience can connect with. So they get a 4 out of 10. At long last, we reach the theme. Do we have a right to be in pain even though our lives rest on the backs of the far worse suffering of our ancestors? And I hope you weren't looking for an answer to that question, because the movie doesn't give one. It lays out a complex emotional question and then provides no insight as to what you should do about it. Looking back on this, I can't believe I wasn't more angry about it the first time I rewatched the movie. This movie resets like no other movie I have ever seen. I can't imagine what would possess you to write a movie that does a complete 180 at the end of it. So in lieu of an answer from the movie, I'll give you an answer, and then you might feel like you watched a better movie. Something you'll learn if you spend as much time in therapy as I have is that comparing your pain to the pain of others is a zero-sum game that nobody wins. It does nothing for you, and it does nothing for the person feeling what you deem to be worse pain than what you're going through. And yes, even though you live a privileged life in whatever metric you define your privilege in, your pain is still real. This is something that the title of this movie suggests that Jesse Eisenberg understands, but the actual plot of A Real Pain gives no indication of. So what should be done about your pain and the tragedy of the world? I already answered this in part. I believe that you should set aside trying to be happy and try to find meaning. Happiness is an emotion that comes and goes. It's a thing that you can use to gauge how comfortable you are in a certain situation, but it's nothing permanent, and it's not something to be strived for. But if everyone on Earth did the best that they could to be the best that they could in a meaningful way, then the Earth might get so much better so quickly that the world of needless suffering is behind us. And even if that isn't the case, wouldn't it be worthwhile to try and find out? See, that's the kind of message you might leave a story if you wanted people to take anything away from it in the end. But maybe Jesse Eisenberg just doesn't think this question is worthy of an answer. So the theme gets a 2 out of 10 because the question they set up, even though they didn't answer it, was at least well thought out and interesting. And that's more than I can say for a lot of movies with poor themes. Overall, A Real Pain gets a pretty average 5 out of 10. And that's about right. It might even be a little bit high. I did genuinely enjoy watching this movie. I was just frustrated by the fact that it felt like it could have gone somewhere interesting and new, and it just really didn't do anything with it. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hit like and subscribe, and check out my most recent video on the controversial horror flick Midsommar. I want to talk about fire. Fire is used in the final sacrifice when Danny chooses to have Christian burned. In this, fire is the destroyer, killing Christian and severing Danny's remaining ties to the outside world.